I've predicted Vogel is going to win, and she is. Joining us now, it's a little bit easier to have the candidate on, I mean, to be honest with you, predicted for a month they're going to win, than it is when you have John Adams on when I predicted he's going to lose. So that's what happens when you make early predictions. You still got to deal with the reality of it. Anyway, joining us now, Jill Vogel. Senator Vogel, good to have you with us.
Good morning. It is great to be on. And you know I would come on, even if you were predicting I would lose, I would still come on. I love being on the show. I love listening. I just love everything you say. And I have to say, just to echo your point about my opponent, it is important because nobody pays much attention to the sort of middle child in the race. Not a lot of people are talking about the lieutenant governor's race because obviously the gubernatorial candidates and the attorney general candidates get all the attention. But I appreciate you pointing out the obvious, and that is in my race, I am running against the guy who is the socialist anchor of the Democratic ticket. He is an incredibly nice person, but he does seem to be the far left anchor of that ticket and is, in fact, even misaligned with his own ticket. He's so far left. So I appreciate you pointing that out.
Yeah, I mean, on the left-wing ticket, he's the furthest left. And, Jill, what is amazing about this race on the Democratic side is that when it started out, you had, Ralph Northam, who was kind of the moderate, you would think. And then you had Justin Fairfax, who was, a former prosecutor, ran for attorney general, a little bit left, but not that bad. And then you had Mark Herring, who was considered to be the far left guy, all right? Even though he was a state senator, as you know, Mark Herring was a moderate. This is how this politics is so funny, right? Now we're 5 weeks, 6 weeks out, and Fairfax is the socialist. Ralph Northam is the far left-wing, progressive, crazy candidate. And Mark Herring is the moderate of the three. It's incredible how this has turned out. Herring just goes along.
Right, and it shows you how they have had to twist themselves in knots to try to navigate their own party. And it's actually really sad because it shows also that their party, what they've had to do to get national money and to win nominations, really cost them a lot of credibility with Democrats in their own state. Because the Democrats that I know don't share their views on some of the socialist positions that they're taking. So, for example, Justin Fairfax believes in single-payer health care for Virginia. I don't know anybody who wants to do away with all private health insurance in our state. I don't know anybody that thinks that getting rid of all of Medicaid, Medicare, and having no private health insurance, just basically government-run health care, is the solution. It's not good for the economy, and it's sure as heck not good for health care. Nobody believes that. But yet that is, how my opponent in this race has doubled down. And I don't think that Democrats actually share the views that Ralph and, the rest of the ticket and, for sure Justin Fairfax are taking on history. I mean, that's just sad. I mean, my friends who are Democrats are sitting around scratching their head and saying, what's happened to my party? So that's how I think that, we have a shot this year, a really good shot. And I know I have a really good shot because I'm running against the guy that for sure has, offended Democrats. And I think it's sad when somebody, takes the Commonwealth of Virginia, which is known for our rich history, that people really respect, and being from the Valley and understanding how much attention we get and how much tourism comes to the Valley because people want to tour our battlefields and see our history. My opponent has called, our monuments psychologically damaging and offensive. I mean, that's just sad. And that's not where people in Virginia are on any of these issues. And they've run so far to the left, trampling one another to try to get further left than the next guy. And I think it's actually a real statement about where Democrats in Virginia are headed.
You're right. And your opponent, Justin Fairfax's position on statues, calling them psychologically damaging, I mean, that's way out of the mainstream with Virginians. I mean, it's like you said from the beginning when this issue first came up, but I do want to point out to everybody that Jill Vogel, as the candidate for Attorney General, really was on the cutting edge of this. I mean, she responded before anybody did, before any of the polls came out, any of the surveys, and said right off the bat, teach history, don't erase it. I think you had signs up the next day saying that.
Well, and here's why, because actually in my lieutenant governor's race, this was an issue, long before any of the things that happened in Charlottesville, long before other people were really talking about it. My opponent was talking about it. He was actually making an issue of history in Virginia because he was so extreme that he was talking about it. So I was talking about it because it offended me. And it actually made me sad that somebody would run for office in Virginia, run for statewide office, and say these monuments should come down. So I was, taking a very strong position before it was, I think necessary, and frankly, before a lot of other people took a strong position. But it's because, I grew up in the Shenandoah Valley. I grew up right by the Newmarket battlefield. I grew up going and visiting battlefields as a child and appreciating that history. I had family who fought in the Civil War, and it was something that I always just took for granted that we would always value and appreciate. And, Virginia's history is a nation's history. And so I just, couldn't believe that that was something that someone running statewide in Virginia would actually espouse, taking our monuments down. So, but I appreciate you pointing that out. And yes, we have signs printed that say, teach history, don't erase it. And those signs, we can't keep them. And it just goes to show you how strongly people feel. And Democrats and Independents and Republicans feel really, really strongly about that issue. And they feel equally strongly about health care. That's probably the biggest issue in this race in Virginia. And my opponent's position is so extreme that I don't know anybody who wants government-run health care in Virginia. And just imagine what it would do to the economy, much less what it would do to people's options for, good health care, for health care that's accessible and affordable. So, and that's before we even get to his issues on the Second Amendment. You can imagine where his positions are on taking your gun rights away. And again, that's not where Virginians are. People want, they want their rights, and they want a strong economy. They don't want to repeal right to work. That's where Justin Fairfax is really, he doubles down on that. He wants to repeal right to work. We're struggling to be more competitive. We want to make decisions at the state level that make Virginia more competitive, not less competitive. And if you, tick down through the list of things that Justin Fairfax would do in Virginia, virtually every single one would put Virginia in the less competitive column and not more competitive. And that's the last thing we want.
All right, so if you were to say the four things that your opponent, Justin Fairfax, is way to the left out of the mainstream of Virginia's on, let's just summarize this. Number one, Joe Vogel, Republican candidate for lieutenant governor. Number one, you said that he's in favor of, let's call it what it is, socialized medicine, right? He's in favor of socialized medicine. No private health care, no private doctors, socialized medicine. He's in favor of really watering down the Second Amendment, as you mentioned, right?
Right, absolutely.
And what were the other?
Repeal our right to work laws. That's one of the things that makes businesses locate in Virginia. The fact that we have right to work laws and we don't force workers to join unions and pay union dues that they don't wish to pay, and it makes Virginia a very appealing state to locate a business. That's a major issue.
And he's for taking down all the statues and monuments at the cost of millions of dollars to Virginians. And that money is going to come directly out of school funding and things of that nature. And so, look, there you have it. He's also opposed to
and we're also,
all the pipelines.
And also, I will tell you, I'm a strong advocate for regulatory reform and tax reform, both things that would put Virginia in a more competitive column versus a less competitive column. And that is not where Justin Fairfax is. And I can tell you, if you look at the statistics about where Virginia is now versus where we were 10 years ago, Democratic leadership has not helped us. We used to be best place to raise a family, best place to be an entrepreneur, best place to educate a child, best place to start a business. And because of our, failure to make decisions that make us more competitive, to change our tax climate, to reduce taxes, while other states are doing that, they're working really hard. They're really, really smart about what to do. Justin Fairfax is 100% against tax reform, against lowering taxes. In fact, he advocates raising taxes. And all that does is force businesses out of Virginia or forces businesses to choose not to come to Virginia. And that's what we most need. We need better jobs in the Commonwealth of Virginia. And that actually has the impact of raising revenue in our state. So all of those are really big differences. And it has the impact of really generating more revenue and making Virginia a more competitive environment, and actually making it a better place to live and work and raise a family. And I think much of that has to do with the fact that Justin hasn't been in Virginia, hasn't been in the legislature, hasn't been really, much around exposed to these issues. I've been in the Senate for 10 years, working on the Finance Committee, being part of budgets, helping solve the compensation crisis for our sheriffs and our state police, and doing all those things without raising taxes. making really good, sound fiscal decisions for Virginia. He moved from Washington, D.C. to Virginia to run for Attorney General, and now he's running for Lieutenant Governor. And again, you pointed out he's a really nice person, but some experience is required before you can make some of these decisions. And I think it's that sort of lack of understanding that makes you make policy choices like, hey, let's have government-run healthcare. Government-run anything, right, I think, is a bad choice. When you can have the private sector do it,
right.
The private sector almost always does it better.
You're right. Your opponent as lieutenant governor would really be the first, I guess, based on his positions. I'm just looking at his positions. I'm just stating fact. If he were elected lieutenant governor, he would be the first socialist, basically, that you've ever had in Virginia presiding over the state Senate. I'm not,
right.
It is what it is. You look at his positions, right. He's a socialist. And,
right.
He didn't start out that way.
And you're casting groundbreaking votes in Virginia as the lieutenant governor.
Yeah, it's just not good. Yeah.
And in a Senate where those 2020 votes actually happen frequently, and you're making policy statewide that will define Virginia for perhaps another generation, and Virginia doesn't want a socialist. It's not where Virginia is, for sure.
I don't think we're there, and I don't think we're ever going to be there. We're certainly not there right now. Again, I want to point out to all of our listeners out there, Trump fans, that Jill Vogel was a Trump supporter with us from the very first day, one of the only elected officials in Virginia with the Trump campaign early on that we could count on. She went to every event we asked her to do, and has been a great supporter of President Trump throughout. What do you think of the tax plan that he just laid out, Jill?
Well, I'll just say for starters, I am rooting for this president. I really am. And I am rooting for him to succeed with the tax plan. I am very disappointed that we didn't have members of Congress who were willing to go along with what I know would have made an enormous impact on health care in this country. States are desperate to move forward with the reforms that we know at the state level we can do, and that we can do better than the federal government will ever be able to do it. And again, it all goes back to, government-run anything is always done poorly. And so if we could get back our ability to manage things at the state level and push things back into the private sector, like healthcare, we'd be a lot better off. But moving on from healthcare, I am eager for the president's tax reform package to move forward. I think people in this country are eager for that to happen. Tax reform is critical. I think people want money back into the economy, back into their businesses. And we haven't had meaningful or successful reform in a very, very long time. And I am really rooting for this president to succeed.
Senator Vogel, what do you think of these NFL protests? Now, I know you're a football fan. We've talked about it many different times, not on this topic, but on who's going to win and things like that. So I know you watch football. I know your family does. You got 5 children. They tune into football. When you see these players not respecting the flag and not willing to stand up for 90 seconds for the national anthem, what do you think of this whole thing, Jill?
I just think that when you fail to stand and salute the flag and stand for our nation's anthem, it is truly an insult to the men and women who have served our nation with honor, and the men and women who have given their very lives for this country. And it really stuns me. It makes me sad. I think there's a level of ignorance about what it even means among some of the people who do it. It just makes me sad. And I think that, we have lost a level of respect, both for one another and for the country. And I think that we have a level of disconnect for what service to our nation means. And so many people actually don't even understand what that sacrifice has been. And I think if they did, they would never, ever, ever fail to stand and show such disrespect. I don't think it is some, statement, some political statement. I think it's just disrespectful. There are many, many other ways to make your political statements. That's not one of them.
What do you think ought to be done?
I'm not sure what should be done, but I can tell you, I think that the NFL should step up. I think this is an inappropriate place to make a political statement. I think that there are plenty of opportunities for our players in other ways to make statements. You have plenty of other venues and other avenues with which to speak, but that I don't think is an appropriate venue to do that. I think they are there, and out of respect for the people who support their teams, I think they have felt terribly, especially those who have served their country, or wounded. I just think it's very disrespectful, and I just feel like that there's a better avenue to do it, and I would like to see the teams themselves and the owners actually do something to show respect for their fans.
So, Jill, you have 5 children. So when your little guys are sitting around watching football on a Sunday, watching the Redskins game, or one of the other games are on, and they see a bunch of players that will not stand up for the national anthem, what do you tell them?
Well, you know what's interesting? My children are patriotic enough and wise enough to be really disappointed by that on their own. And we even had that discussion the other day. And I was really impressed that they were saddened by it, offended by it, and thought it was bad. And so I work really hard to reinforce that, and I'm really proud that my children get it. And because they travel around with a mom who is campaigning and who does what I do, and they have the opportunity to see men and women who have served their country. My father served this country. They have a very, I hope a special appreciation. And they've seen our wounded warriors and our wounded veterans, and so they're very patriotic. And they understand, and I really, really, really have worked hard to instill that in them, and they appreciate it on their own. And I think we all should do a good job and a better job of doing that for our children. And we perhaps wouldn't have people who were so glib about how they treat the flag and how they feel about this country and how they feel about their patriotic obligation. And it's really an obligation and in my mind, a feature of respect, frankly, for our servicemen and women.
Jill Vogel, we're out of time for this segment. I want to thank the senator for being with us. She's running for lieutenant governor. She's the Republican. I think she's going to lead the Republican ticket. I think she's going to win. That's what we have predicted. And she's running a great campaign. We appreciate your being accessible, Jill. And I also want to tell our audience that I can text Jill at any time. She'll come on the very next day or that day. I just texted her today at 6 a.m.
Yes, I will even pull over on the side of the road and wait and eagerly come on the show anytime you ask me. I love being on, and I love catching up with you, and it's sad I have to pull over and talk to you on the radio in order to keep up. But I love being on. I appreciate your having me.
Well, that's why you're going to win. Okay,
people want to go to your... I hope.
You're going to win.
I think we are. I'm working really hard.
You're going to win, Jill.
Well, please, this is the most important thing you can tell everybody, John, is that early absentee voting has already started. So people can vote absentee, and it's really, really important. The Democrats do a great job of that. If you're working, if you're going to be out of town, if you have a job where it's going to be difficult to vote on Election Day, or you know you can't vote, please go vote now and tell your friends and anybody else that Election Day is coming up. A lot of people just aren't dialed into it. So please, please, please go tell people to vote and vote for Vogel.
Jill, what's your website?
It's vogelforvirginia.com. Go sign up, be a volunteer, make a contribution. And please, please, please go get your friends to vote. And I appreciate everybody so much who is helping us. We have so many volunteers around the Commonwealth who are doing so much to help us. And it's because of them, honestly, that we're going to win. So I really appreciate everybody's help.